Welcome Nutrition 101 to Chapter 2. Today we're going to be talking about the DRIs, the dietary guidelines, Choose My Plate, and the food label. So first we have our DRIs, which are 4 sets of values here. So you can see EAR is the amount of a nutrient that meets about half the population's needs. So the EAR isn't really used for individuals. The EAR is only going to be used when we're looking at populations. Examples of that could include things like nursing homes, things like school lunch, things like Meals on Wheels. So we're really using the EAR to say, it's getting 1/3 of most people's need of something. The RDA, we use 2 standard deviations from that EAR, which was the mean. When we look at the mean value that people needed, amount that meets about 50% of the population's needs, the RDA is 2 standard deviations away from that, so it's the amount of a nutrient that meets 97% of a population's need. So that's the amount that is the most specific. We use it when there's enough information scientifically to say this is the amount of nutrient that somebody of a specific gender, life stage, age group needs. The UL is set well above the needs of the population, and that's the point that if you go above that amount of nutrient, you could be at risk for toxicity. And toxicity symptoms could be as, minor as getting flushed arms and cheeks if you have too much niacin, or they could be deadly and life-threatening, such as if you had too much iron. So we really need to watch these 3 values here. We also have another value called the AI. All right, the AI is going to be used when there's not enough information to establish an RDA. An example would be with vitamin D. So for example, vitamin D, you can make your own vitamin D if you have a good amount of sun exposure. So if you have a good amount of sun exposure, you're making your own vitamin D, your need is going to be really different than somebody who lives in Alaska and never goes outside. So the AI is the amount that we look at when we don't have quite enough information to say, hey, science knows that you need just this amount of nutrient. It's the amount we use when we're like, hey, we're not really sure exactly how much you need, but we think that this AI is going to do it for you. So EAR, used for populations. RDA, the most specific amount, 97% of a population's need. AI, we use it when we don't have enough information for that RDA. And then the UL, we don't want to go above that, or we could be at risk for toxicity symptoms. So we take those DRIs and we translate them into guidelines. So these dietary guidelines for Americans, they're updated every 5 years. We should be seeing an update super soon for 2015, but as you can see, the 2010 guidelines came out in February 2011, so they're always a little behind on the curve. But the dietary guidelines will give health recommendations reflecting what people aren't currently doing in the U.S. to meet those DRIs. So for example, we're not getting enough omega-3 fatty acids, so the dietary guidelines in 2010 said, hey, we need a couple servings of fish a week, or to take an omega-3 supplement, or to eat some flaxseed, chia seeds, walnuts, those sorts of things. We also looked at sodium. Most of us are getting twice as much sodium as we need each day, and so the recommendation is that Americans reduce sodium intake. Lastly, we used to say with physical activity, energy in, energy out, match those things. But now we see that most of the population, so 2/3 of the population, is considered overweight or obese. And so now we say move more and eat a little less. So that is what applies to most of the population. And as you can see on Moodle, you're going to be able to access this little PDF right here, right? And that will give you access to the 2010 dietary guidelines. I'll update that when the 2015 ones come out, so you're able to see that as well. So next, we have Choose My Plate. So Choose My Plate is a translation of the dietary guidelines into food choices so people can make food choices that align with the DRIs and the dietary guidelines. As you can see, there are 5 different food groups, right? So we have fruits, vegetables, grains, protein, and dairy. There's also a little oils group that's not shown on here, and an added sugar and fat group, which is called discretionary calories or empty calories. And those 2 food groups will have different recommendations depending on your age, your gender, your physical activity level, etc., etc. So this is what's for the consumer. So we advertise Choose My Plate guidelines to the consumer to meet those recommendations of a varied, balanced, adequate, and moderate diet that we talked about in Chapter 1. So there's some criticism of the former My Pyramid and the current My Plate. So although these recommendations are good recommendations, the translation from the DRIs down to the dietary guidelines, down to Choose My Plate, can become a little politically driven. So, for example, some food pyramids don't have dairy on them at all, but the National Dairy Council is not going to allow dairy group to be taken out, right? Also, we know that high amounts of animal protein and especially red meat have been linked to heart disease. However, the Beef Council isn't going to let, us say red meat's bad for you, right? And then we also have places like the National Corn Growers Association, Monsanto, Corn Refiners Association, and they really have a piece of the pie when you're looking at, what goes on that food pyramid. So there's a little ambiguity when we look at, where these empty calories come from or what's considered a grain, right? So the key message, for example, on grains is to make half your grains whole. And, my argument would be we should probably make all our grains whole, right? But when we look at these key players here, they have a lot to say of what goes into these different food recommendations. And so that translation from this is how to meet your DRIs gets a little bit lost sometimes. And that's why in iProfile, we spend a good amount of time really analyzing that intake compared to DRI, because that's the information we're really looking for. And it's just translated a couple of different times down to that Choose My Plate. And some of that translation gets lost a little, which just happens every time we translate something. Another criticism would be that other cultures are healthier without eating all the food groups. So if we look at the Mediterranean diet pyramid, you can see that their oil intake is way over our oil intake. They have an entire food group that's olive oil. They also have way less animal protein. So you can see that there's red meat is only recommended a few times a month in really small amounts. The eggs, poultry, and fish just a few times a week, maybe dairy once a day. And then that diet is based mostly on veggies, beans, legumes, nuts, fruits, and then a good amount of starchy carbohydrates from potatoes and couscous and rice and pasta and bread and those sorts of things. But they're mostly whole grains there. But when we look at this, it looks very different from our, protein group, your meat and your starch and your veggie and your fruit and your dairy, right? And so when we look at these sorts of things and look at the health outcomes with something like the Mediterranean diet, which has really been linked to low risk of heart disease, we can see that there can be a variety of ways of eating that probably are just as healthy, if not healthier, than following the food pyramid. Same thing over here with the Asian pyramid diet right here. When we look at this Asian pyramid, we can see that, vegetable oils, again, are their own little group. And again, meat is very low on the top of there. You can also see that in the Asian food pyramid, you have some daily physical activity recommended. We had that for a little while in our pyramid. It was taken out because people thought it looked a little bit confusing. So when we switched to the plate, we took out the little guy running up the stairs. But we can see that, exercise obviously is a really important part of the dietary guidelines. Another big criticism is no foods are discouraged. We're just encouraged to eat in moderation. And honestly, most Americans do not know what moderation is. Our culture is just so fast-paced, so more is better, so get as much for your money as possible that it's really hard to understand that concept, right? So, in theory, You could get all your grains from pink frosted donuts. You could get all your vegetables from, 3 cups of French fries. Your milk could be, 3 scoops of ice cream. And if you ate enough Slim Jims, then you'd probably meet your protein needs. So the take-home message here is just question what you're told. Yes, grains do belong in and donuts do belong in the grain group, I guess, and French fries do belong in the vegetable group, but these foods probably should be discouraged a little bit more than they are, because what ends up happening is there's no way that you can meet your nutrient needs within your calorie needs with these high empty calorie, low nutrient density foods. And then we have our food label, right? So lastly, we have this food label that we'll be talking about in class. And when we look at the food label, our food labels right now are a little bit confusing. It takes a little while to figure out what the heck they're trying to say, right? We need to look at them for a good few minutes to decide what the nutrient density is of these. So the key to the food label is to always start with the serving size and servings per container. A lot of foods are sold as single portion foods, but then they actually have more than one serving in them. So you can see here that the serving size is 1 cup and there's 2 servings per container, right? So the whole container, you would have to multiply all of these different values by 2 in order to see how much you're really eating. This becomes a problem when you're getting like a personal frozen pizza and it's called a personal pizza, right? And then you look on the back and you have to be a little bit of a detective, because that back might say that, oh, look, there's 2 or 3 servings in here. So you really need to make sure that you're looking at that. You can see that you want to limit the nutrients in yellow, especially the saturated and trans fat. In terms of total fat, different products are naturally going to have different amounts of fat in them, but you do really want to lower the saturated and trans fat values, which have been linked to cardiovascular disease. Cholesterol and sodium, you also want to be a little bit lower. You can see that on the percentage over on the right-hand side, if something is considered high in a nutrient, if it's 20% or more, so this product would be high in sodium. In terms of carbohydrates, we're looking for more fiber, and then we're looking for less added sugar. Right now, added sugar is not on the nutrition facts label, so all the sugars listed in nutrition facts are going to be both added and natural sugar. So that could be sugar from an apple, or that could be sugar from high fructose corn syrup. So you have to be a little bit of a detective and look at the ingredients list. Ingredients are listed from heaviest to lightest, and so the more sugar that's in something, the higher up it will be on the ingredients list. A good way to search for sugars on the ingredients list is to think about this phrase: anything that ends in "ose" is gross. So anything that ends in OSE, or if you see syrup or sugar cane or cane juice or those sorts of things, there's lots of different names for sugar, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in chapter 4. And then you want to make sure you get enough of the vitamins and minerals. Now these 4, vitamin A, C, calcium, and iron, all have to be on the nutrition facts label, and then other ones are optional. So you can put other nutrients as well, and of course something like Total Cereal that's totally fortified with all the nutrients is going to have that on there. Now all these percentages are based on a 2,000 calorie diet, and then so they're not really meant for individuals. We'll be doing a lot of work in our homeworks in this class to see that the individual nutrients might be quite different from person to person. And lastly, we have supplements. So the things to remember about supplements is that they're innocent until proven guilty. They contain these claims called structure function claims, which you can just base on your interpretation. So your interpretation might be, oh, this contains a lot of omega-3 fatty acids. All right, this is going to increase our eyesight, right? You might say something like that. And then you just have to put a little star and say, this hasn't been evaluated by the FDA, and then you're good to go. So nutrient claims are a lot more specific. So you need very specific things in line to have a nutrient content claim or a health claim. Like heart healthy can be used in cereals, when something has a lot of soluble fiber in it, or you can call something high in calcium if there's 20% or more daily value of calcium. So I have a link on your Moodle to Bigger, Faster, Stronger. I suggest you all take a look there to see a little bit more about supplements, what they do, and how they can be harmful for your health.